I woke to the smell of mildew and despair. My head throbbed, a relentless hammer against my skull. The sheets beneath me felt damp and rough, nothing like the Egyptian cotton I'd fallen asleep on. I forced my eyes open, wincing at harsh light filtering through tattered curtains. This wasn't our luxury resort. I sat up too quickly, the room spinning violently. My mouth was dessert dry, my thoughts fragmented. Where was I? Where was Vanessa? The last thing I remembered was sitting in that private lounge, Vanessa's fingers tracing the rim of her cocktail glass as she smiled. "Let's make tonight special," she'd said. Her friends Zoe and Elise had been there too, exchanging those little glances I'd noticed all week but dismissed. I stumbled to the bathroom, barely recognizing the haggard face staring back from a cracked mirror. 5 days of paradise had evaporated, leaving me in what appeared to be the cheapest motel in this tropical hellhole. My pockets were empty, no wallet, no passport, no phone. Panic surged through me, but years of military training kicked in. Assess, adapt, survive. I searched the room methodically, finding nothing until I spotted my phone propped against a lamp on the nightstand. Relief flooded through me until I unlocked it and saw the video waiting for me. Vanessa's face filled the screen. She was in a car, sunglasses perched on her head, the wind tousling her chestnut hair. "Hey babe," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "By the time you see this, we'll be long gone. Hope you enjoy your stay." Zoe leaned into frame, her signature red lipstick stretched into a predatory smile. "Maxed out all your cards, Nathan. You're officially broke." Then Elise, always the quieter one, delivered the final blow. "Survive this, genius." The screen went black, reflecting my stunned expression. 7 years of marriage, 7 years with a woman who could smile while she destroyed me. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing. This wasn't just a cruel prank. This was calculated, premeditated. The extra long phone calls Vanessa had been taking in private, the hushed conversations with Zoe and Elise, their insistence on planning this trip themselves. First step, figure out where I was. I peered through the window at unfamiliar streets below. This wasn't the tourist district with its manicured lawns and smiling staff. This was the part of paradise they didn't put in brochures. I had no money, no ID, and no way to call for help. The receptionist downstairs would want payment for the room. Without it, I'd be dealing with local authorities, a foreigner with no identification. I pressed my ear against the door. Silence. I turned the knob slowly, wincing at the creak as it opened. The hallway was dimly lit, the carpet stained and peeling. I moved on instinct, quiet and careful, making it to the stairwell without encountering anyone. The lobby came into view, an older man half asleep behind the desk, a small radio playing scratchy music. A security camera blinked above him. I couldn't afford to be seen. I waited until a guest walked in, distracting the receptionist just enough for me to slip past the desk and out the front door. The warm night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop moving. I walked fast, head down, blending into the crowd. I had no money, no phone that could make calls, no plan, but I had one thing, a reason to fight. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. By dawn, I was already up, my muscles sore from sleeping against a wooden pew in a local church that had become my temporary sanctuary. The city was different in the early hours, quieter but just as busy. Vendors set up for the day, workers hurried to their jobs, and I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced since waking up in that motel. For the next week, I established a routine. During the day, I'd work odd jobs, unloading deliveries, moving furniture for shop owners, sweeping storefronts, anything to earn a few dollars. At night, I'd return to the church, wash up in their bathroom, and sleep in the same corner pew. The church's priest, Father Miguel, had noticed me. On my 5th night, he approached with a cup of coffee and a simple sandwich. "You are American?" he asked, his accent thick but his English clear. I nodded, accepting the food gratefully. "You are in trouble." It wasn't a question. I considered lying but saw no point. "Yes." He nodded thoughtfully. "There is a man who might help you. He finds work for people who need special arrangements." My military instincts flared. "What kind of work?" Father Miguel's eyes met mine. "The kind that pays well enough to get you home." He wrote down an address on a scrap of paper. "Ask for Marco. Tell him Father Miguel sent you." The next morning, I found myself standing outside a weathered building with a faded auto repair sign. I knocked on the side door. Nothing. I knocked again, harder. The door swung open, revealing a man in his 40s with sharp eyes and a face that had seen its share of fights. He wore a stained white tank top and had a wrench in one hand. What? He barked. I'm looking for Marco. Father Miguel sent me. His expression shifted subtly. He looked me over, assessing. Why? I need work. He studied me a moment longer, then stepped aside. Come in. The interior was a stark contrast to the building's exterior. While it contained legitimate auto parts and tools, there was a back room with expensive computers, surveillance monitors, and a table where 3 men sat counting cash. I'm Marco, the man said, closing the door behind us. What's your story, American? I gave him the abbreviated version: tourist robbed of everything, no embassy help, needed money to get home. I left out Vanessa and her betrayal. That was personal. Marco listened without interruption, then laughed. Father Miguel has a soft heart. He sends me strays thinking I run a charity. I met his gaze steadily. I'm not looking for charity. I'll work. What skills do you have that I would pay for? Military training, strategic thinking. I can drive anything. I can follow orders, and I know when to keep my mouth shut. That caught his interest. Military? Huh? Which branch? Army, Special Forces. Marco exchanged glances with one of the men at the table, a younger guy with a scar running from his temple to his jaw. Diego, Marco called. What do you think? Diego approached, circling me like a predator. He looked soft, like a tourist. I didn't react. I'd been underestimated before. Marco scratched his chin. We lost Emilio last week. Need a new driver. One job. You do it right, we talk about more. You mess up. He drew his finger across his throat. I nodded. When do we start? Tonight. Be here at midnight. The job was simple in theory: drive to 3 different locations, wait while Marco and his men made deliveries, then return to the garage. No questions, no conversation. The second location was a warehouse near the docks. All 3 men went inside, leaving me alone in the van. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. I was considering checking inside when gunshots erupted. My training kicked in. I started the engine, ready for a quick escape, but kept my position. Running would make me a liability. Marco and Diego burst from the warehouse, dragging a bleeding man between them. They threw him in the back of the van. Go, go, Marco shouted. I hit the gas, tires squealing as we tore away from the warehouse. In the rearview mirror, I saw 2 men emerge with guns drawn. Faster. Diego yelled as bullets pinged against the van's metal frame. I navigated through narrow streets, taking random turns until I was certain we weren't being followed. Where to? I asked, voice steady. Marco looked at me with newfound respect. You didn't run. That wasn't the job. Over the next 2 weeks, I became Marco's regular driver. The jobs varied: sometimes deliveries, sometimes pickups, occasionally acting as security while Marco conducted business. I didn't ask questions about what we were transporting. What mattered was that I was earning enough to eventually buy a fake passport and a ticket home. One night, after a particularly profitable job, Marco invited me for a drink at a small bar he owned. You're good at this, he said, pouring tequila. Could make real money if you stayed. I shook my head. I need to get back. Marco studied me. The woman who robbed you. Wife? I stiffened. I'd never mentioned Vanessa to him. He laughed at my expression. Small tourist town. People talk. American businessman drugged and robbed by his wife and her friends. Big scandal. I downed the tequila, the burn matching the anger flaring inside me. Then you know why I need to get back. Marco leaned forward. Revenge? Justice. He nodded slowly. There's a big job next week. Dangerous, but the pay is triple. Enough for your passport, ticket, and then some. I'm in. Marco refilled our glasses. To justice, then. We clinked glasses, but as I drank, I noticed Marco checking his phone, his expression changing subtly. Problem? I asked. He hesitated, then showed me the screen. It was an email in Spanish, but I recognized the attached photo immediately: my face, with text beneath it. Someone's offering a lot of money for information about you, Marco said. Says you're dangerous, need to be stopped before you leave the country. My blood ran cold. Vanessa. Marco pocketed his phone. Your wife doesn't want you coming home, my friend. In that moment, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about survival anymore. Vanessa wasn't just running with my money, she was actively trying to ensure I never made it back. The job next week, I said, my voice hardening. I want double what you offered. Marco raised an eyebrow. Why? Because now I'm not just going home, I'm going hunting. The big job went down exactly as Marco had described: dangerous, lucrative, and the final piece I needed to get home. We'd intercepted a shipment at the docks, exchanged gunfire with rival operators, and walked away with enough cash to make everyone happy. My cut was substantial enough for a high-quality fake passport, a plane ticket, and a decent cushion to fund what came next. But I wasn't leaving yet, not until I sent Vanessa a message. Through Marco's connections, I discovered Vanessa and her friends were still in the country, living it up at the Grand Hotel, the most expensive resort in the city. They'd extended their stay, probably waiting for confirmation that their hit on me had been successful. I spent 3 days planning my approach. The Grand Hotel had security cameras, staff who would remember faces, and guests who might notice a confrontation. I needed to be strategic, to create fear without leaving evidence. My first move was simple but effective. I had Marco's tech guy hack into the hotel's reservation system. He flagged Vanessa's room for maintenance issues: intermittent power outages, water temperature problems, strange noises in the walls. Small disruptions to make her uncomfortable, to make her feel like something wasn't right. Next, I arranged for their rental car to disappear. Not stolen, just relocated to the hotel's overflow lot with the battery disconnected. A minor inconvenience that would add to their growing unease. But the real psychological warfare began with Zoe. I tracked her routine over 2 days. Every morning she went to the same rooftop bar for breakfast, always alone, always at the same table overlooking the ocean. On the 3rd day, I was waiting. I wore clothes Marco had provided: expensive linen shirt, designer sunglasses, looking every bit the successful tourist. I took a seat at the bar, watching Zoe through my peripheral vision as she sipped her mimosa, scrolling through her phone. When the bartender stepped away, I made my move. I walked to her table and sat down across from her. It took her a moment to look up from her phone. When she did, the color drained from her face. Her mimosa glass slipped from her fingers, spilling across the white tablecloth. "Hello, Zoe," I said calmly. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes were wide with disbelief, like she was seeing a ghost. I reached across the table and took a sip of her mimosa. "Tell Vanessa I said hello." Zoe scrambled from her seat, knocking it over as she backed away. You're supposed to be." "Dad?" I smiled, disappointed. She turned and ran, nearly colliding with a waiter. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. The seed was planted. I returned to my small rented room near Marco's garage and waited. By evening, Marco called with an update. "Your wife checked out of the hotel," he said. "Moved to another resort across town. The redhead and the blonde went with her." I smiled. They were running. Good. The next phase of my plan required more direct action. I needed Vanessa to know I wasn't just alive, I was coming for her. I waited until nightfall, then made my way to their new hotel. I slipped in through a service entrance, wearing a hotel maintenance uniform Marco had procured. Finding the presidential suite was easy. I didn't need to enter, I just needed to leave my message. I slid a hotel envelope under the door with a simple note: "You tried to bury me. Now I'm digging up the truth." Then I found a spot across the street with a clear view of the hotel entrance and waited. 20 minutes later, Vanessa burst through the front doors, her face pale, her movements frantic. Zoe and Elise followed, both looking over their shoulders repeatedly. I stayed exactly where I was, watching their panic unfold. Vanessa was on her phone immediately, probably calling whoever she'd hired to take care of me. But that call wouldn't be answered. Marco had made sure of that. The next morning, I followed Vanessa to the bank. Through the window, I watched her face contort with frustration as she tried to access her accounts. I'd already contacted my bank back home, reporting the fraud and freezing everything. Her credit cards would be declined, her cash limited to whatever she had on hand. That night, I sent another message, this time directly to her phone: "Meet me at midnight. The old dock at the edge of the marina. Come alone, or everyone will know what you did." I knew she'd come. She had no choice. She was desperate now, cut off from money, isolated from help, and terrified of what I might reveal. The marina was quiet at midnight, the only sounds coming from boats gently rocking against the docks and distant music from waterfront restaurants. I stood at the end of the abandoned pier, watching the moonlight ripple across the dark water. I heard her before I saw her hesitant footsteps on weathered wood. When she stepped into view, I barely recognized her. The confident, polished woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone with haunted eyes and nervous hands. "Nathan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch between us, watching her discomfort grow. I don't know what you think is happening here, but… Save it, I cut in, my voice calm. You already know why you're here. She crossed her arms, trying to appear unbothered, but her eyes darted around, looking for escape routes. So what? You're just going to threaten me. What do you even want? I took a slow step forward, watching as she instinctively moved back. Did you really think you could erase me? Did you think I'd just disappear and let you live happily ever after on my money? She clenched her jaw. I don't know what you're talking about. I chuckled. Wrong answer. On cue, Marco's car pulled up behind her. She spun around, her breath catching at the sight of Marco and Diego stepping out. Who are they? She asked, her voice shaking. Friends of mine, I said simply. She took another step back, then another, her eyes darting between me, Marco, and the dark water beyond the dock. Nathan, let's talk about this. We can work something out. I folded my arms, like the way you worked something out when you drugged me, when you left me for dead. That was, she faltered. That was a mistake. We didn't think that I'd survive. I finished for her. Yeah, I figured. Her breathing was ragged now. I let the silence hang between us, let her feel the weight of everything she had done. Then I pulled out my phone. I have everything, I said quietly. Proof of what you did. The fraud, the theft, the hit you tried to put on me. Her lips parted in shock. Nathan, I showed her the screen of video compilation Marco's tech guy had assembled. Footage from the hotel security camera showing her and her friends carrying my unconscious body. Bank records of transfers from my accounts to hers. A recorded phone call between her and the man she'd hired to find me. Her voice clear as she said, make sure he doesn't leave the country. Her knees almost buckled. I stepped closer. You don't have a way out of this, Vanessa. She was trembling now, desperate. What do you want? She whispered. I leaned in, close enough for her to hear every word. I want you to feel what I felt. She took a shaky breath. And if I refuse? I smiled. Then you'll spend the rest of your life running. What do I need to do? She finally asked, her voice hollow. Everything goes back to me, I said, every cent, and you sign a confession. A confession? Her eyes widened. You can't be serious. Dead serious. You write down exactly what you did, in your own words. Then you disappear. And if I do this, you'll leave me alone. I studied her. This woman I'd once loved, now reduced to bargaining for her freedom. I'll consider our accounts settled. She closed her eyes briefly, then nodded. Fine. Marco approached with a pen and paper. Vanessa's hands shook as she wrote, documenting her betrayal in painful detail. When she finished, she looked up at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Is this what you wanted? To see me broken? I took the confession, reading it carefully before folding it and placing it in my pocket. What I wanted was the life we built together. What I wanted was a wife who didn't see me as an obstacle to overcome. She flinched at that. But we don't always get what we want, I continued. Sometimes we get what we deserve. I stepped off the plane, inhaling the crisp air of home. For weeks I'd been trapped in a foreign land, stripped of everything, forced to claw my way back from the grave Vanessa had dug for me. But now I was standing here, back in my country, back in my life. Only it wasn't the same life anymore. Everything had changed. I wasn't the same man who had boarded a flight with his wife, thinking he was going on a relaxing vacation. That man had been naive. That man had trusted too easily. That man had died in a cheap motel, alone and abandoned. The man who returned was something else entirely. I caught a taxi to a hotel downtown, not my home, not yet. I needed time to think, to plan my next move. The confession Vanessa had signed was safely tucked in my luggage, along with evidence of her crimes. I could turn it all over to the police, have her arrested for fraud, theft, even conspiracy to commit murder. But that would mean courts, trials, publicity, dragging our private hell into the public eye. Was that what I wanted? The next morning, I began rebuilding my life. I visited my bank, providing identification and explaining I'd been robbed overseas. The manager was sympathetic, especially when I showed him the police report Marco had helped me obtain. We've already flagged some suspicious transactions, Mr. Reed, he said, typing at his computer. Large transfers to accounts we couldn't verify. My wife, I said simply. We're separating. By afternoon, I had access to enough money to start over. I rented a furnished apartment downtown, bought clothes and necessities, and began reaching out to business contacts to explain my absence. But through it all, one thought dominated my mind: Vanessa was here, somewhere in this city. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Claire with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. 3 days later, she called with an update. "Found her," Claire said. "She's staying at the Westbrook, downtown. Registered under her maiden name, Parker." "Is she alone?" "As far as I can tell. No visitors, eats most meals in her room. She's been meeting with a lawyer, Timothy Grayson, specializes in criminal defense." My jaw tightened. She's preparing for me to press charges. A week passed. Claire reported that Vanessa had moved from the hotel to a small apartment in a modest neighborhood across town. She had applied for jobs, opened a new bank account, and continued meeting with her lawyer. She was rebuilding too, preparing for whatever came next. I found myself driving past her apartment one evening, parking across the street, watching her windows. Lights were on, shadows moving behind curtains. She was in there, living her life, probably terrified of when I would make my move. The power I held over her was intoxicating, but also exhausting. Every day I woke up thinking about her, about what she'd done, about what I could do in return. She consumed my thoughts, just as she had when we were married, but now it was hatred, not love, that bound us together. Was this what I wanted? To spend my life tethered to her by revenge? I was still sitting there when her front door opened. Vanessa stepped out, wrapped in a coat against the evening chill. She looked different, her hair pulled back simply, minimal makeup, none of the designer clothes she'd once insisted on. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. She didn't see me as she walked down the street toward a small grocery store on the corner. I followed at a distance, watching as she selected a few items: pasta, sauce, a small bottle of wine. The cashier smiled at her, she didn't smile back. I waited outside, and when she emerged, I stepped directly into her path. She froze, the grocery bag clutched against her chest like a shield. "Nathan." "Vanessa." For a long moment, we just stared at each other, the air between us charged with unspoken accusations. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you here to finish it?" "Finish what?" "Whatever you started back there." "The police? Prison?" Her eyes darted around, looking for escape routes, witnesses. "Just tell me what you're going to do." I studied her face, the face I'd once loved, the face that had smiled as she betrayed me. But now I saw something else: fear, yes, but also resignation. She'd been living with the sword of Damocles hanging over her head, waiting for it to fall. "I haven't decided yet," I said honestly. She swallowed hard. Can we talk? Not here." I hesitated, then nodded toward a small park across the street. "There." We sat on a bench, a careful distance between us, her grocery bag a barrier. The evening was quiet, just a few dog walkers and joggers passing by. "I've been waiting for the police," she said finally. "Every knock at the door, every phone call, I thought it was over." "It could be," I said. "One call, that's all it would take." She nodded, accepting this. "I know." "Why did you do it?" The question that had haunted me for weeks finally escaped. "Was it just the money? Or did you hate me that much?" Vanessa stared at her hands. "I didn't hate you. I felt trapped. Like my whole life had become about being Mrs. Nathan Reed, successful businessman's wife. I lost myself somewhere along the way." "So you decided to steal everything and leave me for dead in a foreign country." My voice remained calm, but I felt the anger rising. "That's quite a divorce strategy." She flinched. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. We were just going to take some money, enough to start over. But then Zoe said you'd come after us, that you'd never let it go. And Elise suggested the sleeping pills in your drink, just to give us time to get away." "And leaving me in that motel? Was that part of the original plan too?" She shook her head, tears forming. "We panicked. You weren't supposed to be out that long. When you wouldn't wake up, Zoe said we should just go, that you'd be fine." "I wasn't fine," I said quietly. "I had nothing. No money, no ID, no way home." "I know." A tear slipped down her cheek when I realized what we'd done, but by then it was too late. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I'd married, the woman who'd betrayed me, the woman now sitting beside me, broken and afraid. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the folded confession she'd signed. "Do you remember what you wrote here?" She nodded, her eyes fixed on the paper. "Every word of it is true." "Yes," she whispered. I unfolded it slowly, reading her handwriting in the fading light. Her admission of guilt, her description of the plan, her role in everything that had happened. It was all there, enough to send her to prison for years. Then I tore it in half. Then quarters. Then eighths, until it was nothing but confetti in my hands. Vanessa stared at me, confusion replacing fear. I don't understand. I let the pieces scatter in the evening breeze. Neither do I, entirely. You're not going to the police? No. Why? I considered the question carefully. Because it wouldn't undo what happened. It wouldn't give me back those weeks. And because I'm tired, Vanessa. Tired of carrying this anger, this need for revenge. It's exhausting. She was crying openly now. I don't deserve your mercy. This isn't mercy, I said, standing up. This is me choosing not to let you define the rest of my life. You've taken enough already. I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. Nathan? What happens now? I looked back at her, this woman who had once been the center of my world, now a stranger. Now we both start over, separately. As I walked away, I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd set down a burden I hadn't realized I was carrying. The anger wasn't gone, it might never be completely gone, but it no longer controlled me. I'd gone to that park thinking I would confront Vanessa one last time, that I would make her suffer as I had suffered. Instead, I'd found something unexpected, the power to walk away. Marco's words came back to me, remember who you became there. In that foreign country, stripped of everything, I'd become someone harder, someone capable of terrible things. But I'd also become someone who survived, who adapted, who found strength I didn't know I had. Now I had a choice about who I would become next.